A lonely little girl, only 5 years old, sleeping alone in an airport chair with no one by her side, until fate stepped in. A powerful millionaire, CEO in a sky blue suit on his way to his private jet, noticed her and stopped. That single moment changed both of their lives forever. This is not just a story of wealth or power. It's about love, protection, and the kind of kindness the world often forgets. Stay with us, because what happens next will melt your heart and leave a lesson our society truly needs. The airport was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that feels almost heavy. Shiny floors reflected the bright white lights above, but no warmth came from them. Every sound echoed. The faint hum of the escalators, the distant voice of a cleaning staff member, and the rolling of a single suitcase somewhere far down the terminal. Most passengers had already boarded flights or gone home. The once busy gates stood empty, their chairs scattered with forgotten coffee cups and wrinkled newspapers. It looked less like a place of travel and more like a hollow waiting room for lost souls. And in that stillness, on a row of hard, cold metal chairs, lay a little girl. She was no more than 5 years old, far too young to be in such a place alone. Her small body curled into a ball, knees tucked tightly to her chest. A tiny pink teddy bear rested in her arms, its fur worn and faded from being held too often. Her blonde hair fell across her delicate face, strands clinging to her soft cheeks. Every so often she twitched in her sleep, as if even her dreams were uneasy. Her shoes dangled loosely off the edge of the chair, not even touching the ground. One shoe was scuffed badly, the sole nearly torn apart. The other looked as if it had been held together with hope rather than strength. She looked too small for the vast emptiness of the airport, too fragile, like a single candle flame trying to survive in a storm. The world around her kept moving, rushing, yet she was invisible. Travelers passed her by without a glance. Some glanced briefly but quickly turned away, as if afraid to involve themselves. Others were too caught up in their own departures, their phones, their busy schedules. To them, she was just a shadow in a corner, a piece of scenery, not a child in need. Nobody stopped to ask why a 5-year-old girl was alone in the middle of the night. Nobody thought to wonder who she was waiting for, or if anyone was coming at all. Her breathing was soft, but every now and then she shifted uncomfortably. The chair's cold surface offered no comfort, no warmth, no protection. She whispered faintly in her sleep, words too quiet to understand. Was it her mother's name she whispered? Or maybe her father's? Or maybe she was calling to no one at all because there was no one left. The airport, so full of people, felt emptier than ever in her presence. It was as if her loneliness spread across the room, seeping into the walls, into the silence. The bright lights above did nothing to hide the sadness written across the scene. She had been waiting for hours. At first, she might have looked around, hopeful. At first, she might have believed someone was coming back for her. But hope fades faster in the heart of a child who feels forgotten. Now she didn't look around anymore. Now she simply clutched her teddy bear tighter, as if that bear was her only family. The pink bear's button eyes stared blankly forward, its head pressed against her chest. It carried her secrets. It carried her fears. It carried her loneliness. The chair beneath her groaned as she shifted slightly in her sleep. A deep sigh escaped her lips, soft but heavy with exhaustion. No 5-year-old should ever look this tired, this worn out by the world. Yet here she was, surrounded by hundreds of empty seats but still utterly alone. The kind of aloneness that cuts deeper than silence. The kind of aloneness that makes the heart ache, just to witness. She had no blanket, no pillow, no hand to hold. Just her teddy bear, just her tiny frame on a chair that swallowed her whole. And yet, though the night was cold, though the silence was cruel, fate was moving. Her story was about to turn, though she did not know it yet. While she slept, unaware, footsteps were echoing toward her. Footsteps that would not ignore her. Footsteps that would not pass her by. Footsteps that would change her life forever. Because sometimes, in the loneliest corners, when the world forgets you, destiny remembers. And destiny was walking closer. Her life was about to change forever. Alexander Harris moved through the nearly empty terminal with his usual air of authority. Every step of his polished black shoes echoed against the glossy floor, each sound reminding the world of his presence. At 35 years old, he was already one of the youngest and most powerful CEOs in the airline industry. He carried himself with the calm assurance of a man who had built an empire with his own hands. His sky-blue suit, crisp and tailored perfectly to his frame, caught the reflection of the overhead lights, making him stand out from the tired, ordinary travelers around him. His watch gleamed with every swing of his arm, and his tie was knotted with precision, like everything else in his life. But tonight he wasn't supposed to be here. His private jet was already waiting at the VIP section, engines ready to take him wherever he wished. Usually he would never walk among the regular passengers. He had assistants for that. And yet something had tugged at him tonight, pulling him away from convenience, away from protocol, toward this very terminal. His mind had been heavy all evening, burdened with thoughts of endless meetings, empty boardrooms, and shallow conversations. Despite all his wealth and success, something in his life remained hollow. It was a hollowness he buried under contracts, luxury, and business strategies, but it was always there, waiting in the quiet moments. And then he saw her. At first, she didn't seem real. A tiny figure curled up on a row of unforgiving metal chairs, golden strands of hair covering her face. A faded pink teddy bear clutched tight against her chest. Alexander's confident stride slowed instantly. The world that always seemed sharp and fast around him suddenly blurred, fading into silence. His breath caught as he realized it wasn't just a tired passenger. It was a child, a little girl, alone. He froze where he stood, eyes fixed on her fragile form. The sight pierced through the walls he had built around his heart for years. For the first time in a long time, he didn't see numbers, profits, or power. He saw innocence, vulnerability, and abandonment. "Why is a child here alone?" he whispered, almost afraid of the answer. His voice, usually firm and commanding, trembled just slightly. The cleaning staff passed by without even glancing at her. A man wheeling a suitcase hurried past, his eyes fixed on his phone. No one stopped, no one cared. But Alexander cared. Something inside him stirred, an ache he couldn't ignore. Memories from his own past flickered in his mind. Nights of emptiness, moments where he too felt invisible in a world that only valued success. Perhaps that was why his chest tightened at the sight of her. For years, people had called him untouchable. Business magazines described him as cold, efficient, ruthless. But standing there, staring at a little girl forgotten in an airport chair, he didn't feel untouchable. He felt human, fragile. A man with a heart he had tried too hard to hide. His fists clenched at his sides, not from anger, but from the sudden rush of protectiveness. He could have turned away. It wasn't his responsibility. But something deep within told him he couldn't walk past her. Not tonight. Not ever. Without thinking, his steps grew softer, slower. The sound of his polished shoes no longer echoed with authority. They whispered with caution, with care. He moved toward her like a man stepping into a sacred place, afraid to disturb the fragile peace she had found in her sleep. Each step closer, his chest grew heavier, his breath slower. The powerful CEO who had signed billion-dollar contracts without flinching now felt nervous approaching a sleeping 5-year-old girl. But he couldn't stop himself. The world had ignored her. The travelers had passed her by, but Alexander Harris would not. His sky-blue suit rustled gently as he knelt down, lowering himself so he was no longer the towering figure of authority. He was just a man whose heart was unexpectedly drawn to a child who needed someone. And in that quiet moment, without even speaking, his life began to change. The faint sound of footsteps echoed across the nearly empty terminal. Soft, steady, deliberate. But to the little girl, they were enough to stir her fragile dreams. Her small body shifted uneasily on the cold chair, and her eyelids fluttered like butterfly wings trying to open. The dim glow of the lights above reflected in her sleepy eyes. At first, she looked confused, caught between the safety of dreams and the sharp edges of reality. Then she saw him. A tall man in a sky-blue suit standing just a few feet away. His polished shoes glimmered under the harsh lights. His face, though serious, carried something softer now, a mix of concern and gentleness. To her tiny frame, he looked impossibly big, almost like a giant. Fear rushed through her. Her little arms tightened instantly around her teddy bear, hugging it like a shield. Her knuckles turned white from the force of her grip. The pink bear, once her comfort, now became her only protection against the unknown. Alexander noticed her reaction and his heart clenched. The last thing he wanted was to frighten her. So instead of towering over her, he slowly lowered himself, kneeling down until his eyes were level with hers. He made himself smaller, gentler. Not a CEO, not a stranger, but simply a man who cared. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice warmer than it had been in years. The tone surprised even him. He was used to commanding rooms, giving orders, demanding respect. But here, with this fragile child, his voice softened naturally, like he was afraid of breaking something delicate. The little girl blinked at him, her lips trembling. She didn't answer right away. Her chest rose and fell quickly, like a frightened bird caught in a trap. Alexander waited patiently, offering no rush, no pressure. He let the silence sit between them, calm and gentle, until finally he spoke again. "Are you waiting for someone?" The question hung in the air. For a moment, her eyes darted around the empty terminal as if searching for an answer she wished existed. Her small hands stroked the teddy bear's ear nervously, as though the bear might give her courage to reply. And then she shook her head. The movement was slow, heavy, and heartbreaking. "No one's coming," she whispered. Her voice cracked like glass, trembling with a sadness far too deep for a 5-year-old to carry. The words didn't just speak of a moment. They spoke of a truth. Alexander froze. He felt the impact of her words hit his chest like a weight he couldn't bear. A child. Alone. In the middle of the night. In a place meant for travelers, not for the abandoned. The world around him blurred. The shiny floors, the glowing signs, the distant voices. None of it mattered. The only thing he saw was her. A little girl who had already learned the taste of loneliness. Something inside him snapped. For years, he had built his life around power, planes, and luxury. He had surrounded himself with the finest things money could buy. But in this one fragile moment, all of it seemed worthless. Because what good was success if a child could be sitting here unseen? What good was wealth if the world still allowed innocence to be forgotten? His throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to promise her something, anything. But words failed him. His heart spoke louder than his tongue. For the first time in years, Alexander Harris didn't feel like the untouchable CEO. He didn't feel like a man in control of millions. He felt like a human being staring at a truth he could not ignore. And in that instant, he knew, no matter what it cost him, no matter what the world thought, he could not walk away. Alexander crouched beside the chair, his sky-blue suit a sharp contrast against the cold gray metal. Emily's tiny frame seemed to shrink further into the seat, as though she wished the world would forget she existed. Her small voice trembled as she whispered, "My name is Emily. My mommy and daddy, they're gone." The words hit Alexander like a thunderclap. "Gone?" he repeated, his deep voice softer now, careful not to frighten her. He wanted to believe she meant something else, that maybe they were just late or momentarily lost in the airport maze. But when her little eyes filled with tears, he knew the truth was heavier. "Emily," he said gently, kneeling so their eyes were level, "can you tell me where you last saw them?" She shook her head. Her blonde curls bounced as she whispered, "They left, and they didn't come back." Alexander's chest tightened. He had faced ruthless boardrooms, cutthroat negotiations, and billion-dollar deals. Yet nothing had ever shaken him like this child's fragile confession. Determined, he stood up and approached the nearest airline employee, a tired young man in a wrinkled uniform. "Have you seen a little girl's parents? Her name is Emily. She's been left here." The worker frowned, glancing at Emily, then back at Alexander. I don't know anything, sir. No one reported a missing child tonight." Unsatisfied, Alexander pressed on. He walked to the information desk, his polished shoes echoing loudly in the quiet terminal. "A 5-year-old girl is alone here. Has anyone asked about her?" The woman behind the desk shook her head slowly. "No one, sir. Not a single report." He felt a storm rising in him. How could people just pass by her? How could an innocent child slip through the cracks of such a busy place, unseen, unheard, uncared for? Alexander returned to Emily, who sat hugging her pink teddy bear, her eyes wide as she watched every step he took. Nobody knows anything, he told himself under his breath. But then, he looked into her trusting little face and realized something powerful. Answers might not matter as much as what he chose to do right now. He knelt again, his voice steady but warm. Emily, I don't know why no one's come for you yet, but I want you to know something. He slowly extended his hand toward her. You're not alone anymore. I'll stay with you. I promise. Emily hesitated, her tiny fingers trembling as they clutched her teddy. Her eyes flickered between his large hand and his kind face. Then, with a courage that broke his heart, she reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment her small fingers slipped into his palm, Alexander felt something inside him shift. All the wealth, all the planes, all the power he had built meant nothing compared to this single fragile gesture of trust. Emily whispered, almost inaudibly. Thank you. Alexander squeezed her hand gently. No, Emily. Thank you, for trusting me. For the first time in years, Alexander Harris, the untouchable CEO in the sky blue suit, felt like more than a man of business. He felt like a protector. And in that silent terminal, with no one else watching, he silently vowed he would not let go of her hand, no matter what answers they found. The private jet sat waiting outside on the runway, its engines silent, its crew checking their watches. But Alexander Harris never returned to board it. Instead, he stayed in that echoing terminal with the little girl who had unknowingly captured his heart. Are you hungry? He asked gently, crouching down so his eyes were level with hers. Emily nodded shyly, clutching her teddy bear like it was her lifeline. Alexander led her to one of the few shops still open. He picked out a steaming cup of mac and cheese, a carton of apple juice, and a soft blanket decorated with little stars. As he set the tray in front of her, Emily's eyes widened as though she had never been given such kindness before. Eat as much as you like, he encouraged. She took a careful spoonful, then glanced up at him. Thank you, she whispered. She said it again after her second bite, again after her third. Every mouthful carried gratitude that touched him deeper than words ever could. Alexander pulled a chair beside her, his tall frame folding into the small space as though he belonged nowhere else. He listened as she spoke between bites, how her teddy bear's name was Mr. Buttons, how her favorite color was sky blue, like your jacket, and how she dreamed of flying high in a big airplane one day. His chest tightened. He had built an empire of airplanes, yet hearing her dream made him realize how little joy he had ever taken in them. Through her innocent voice, flight became magical again. When she finished eating, he gently wrapped the starry blanket around her small shoulders. Better? He asked. She nodded, her lips curving into a timid smile. Much better. Hours ticked by, the terminal growing emptier, but Alexander never once glanced at the clock. Instead, he told her small stories about clouds shaped like castles and how stars guided planes at night. Emily giggled softly, her laughter like fragile bells echoing in the vast airport. Eventually, her eyelids grew heavy. She shifted closer, her little body leaning against him. Alexander, without hesitation, draped his sky-blue jacket over her, letting its warmth shield her from the chill. Her golden curls brushed against his arm as she whispered, barely audible, I feel safe now. Those 4 words struck him harder than any deal he had ever closed. His throat tightened as he looked down at the child who trusted him so completely after knowing him for only a few hours. For years, Alexander had defined success by contracts signed, skyscrapers built, and fleets of planes purchased. But now, sitting in a deserted airport with a 5-year-old asleep against his arm, he discovered something far greater. This, her trust, her safety, her peace, was worth more than any luxury he had ever owned. It was priceless. As Emily's breathing slowed into soft rhythms, Alexander sat still, unwilling to disturb her. His heart, once wrapped in steel walls of ambition, cracked open with a warmth he hadn't felt in decades. He had never felt so protective in his life, never felt so certain that he was exactly where he was meant to be. That night, with his sky blue jacket keeping her warm, Alexander Harris made a silent promise to himself. This little girl would never feel alone again. And as the airport lights glowed dim above them, two lives, one powerful yet lonely, one fragile yet hopeful, changed forever. The next morning, Alexander made a life-changing decision. He arranged care and a safe home for Emily, but he also did something greater. He started a foundation through his airline to help children who were lost, abandoned, or forgotten in airports and public places. He wanted no child to ever feel invisible again. As for Emily, she was never left alone again. Alexander became her guardian, her protector, and, over time, the father figure she had been searching for. And as she grew, she often told people, "I was just a little girl sleeping in a chair until a man in a sky blue suit saw me." The lesson spread far beyond the airport walls. No matter how rich, busy, or powerful you are, the greatest wealth is noticing the ones society ignores and giving them love.